All right, so before we get started, really quick, I thought I'd just take a minute to tip the hat here. So as a security person, I'm not really a builder. So I can't really think in a way that allows me to stack the Legos up into a beautiful tower that does great things. I was that kid in preschool that knocked your tower down. So I'm still that kid, I'm just a lot older, and I get paid to knock the tower down now. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about developers and why it is I like to target them, but serious respect, guys, because there's no way that I can possibly do what you guys do. So a little bit about me. I'm also a glutton for punishment because A, I'm doing a security talk, B, I'm doing a security talk at the end of the day right before the bar opens. So I do realize that I am standing between you and the bar. I will try to make this as enjoyable as possible. So what I thought I'd put together for you guys today was kind of a mix of just a quick little introduction about who I am and what it is I do, and how all the pieces fit together when we do at SecureCon what we refer to as a penetration test or a red team. Right, so we get paid to break all the things, hack all the things, knock down all the block towers. But I really wanted to kind of break out those pieces so that you could see how it's built, because I realized that there's a lot of dog and pony show, especially when it comes to advertising security and trying to sell products associated with security. So I thought I'd break it all down, and then we'll have a little fun at the end, and I'll walk you through how we broke into a building in Chicago. So it's always fun to learn at somebody else's expense, so that's what today's gonna be about. Like the intro already said, executive security consultant, so I basically run our commercial side of the company, so I'm queen of the nerds. We have a commercial side and we have a federal side. The federal folks do a lot of compliance regulatory stuff. They don't really talk to us, we don't really talk to them, and that's fine. And because I'm also an even bigger glutton for punishment, not only did I take a security path in my career, I also wrote a book on how to make a security awareness program, which is the red-headed stepchild, pun intended, of the security industry. Nobody wants to talk about security training and how it works. So I kind of went out there and ventured out on that branch. I do a lot of social engineering training, so I also teach the ways of the social engineer to not necessarily just corporations, but also individuals and red teams that are looking to incorporate that into their attack structure. Enough about me. So we see a lot of stuff on the news lately, and it's getting really bad every day. I think it's almost to the point where we're kind of desensitized against it. So-and-so has been breached. So-and-so has been hacked. They used an advanced persistent threat to attack them. So unfortunately, a lot of the advanced persistent threats are not really advanced. They will be persistent because you can build that in. You guys know how to do that. That's the little bit of code that I can do, just enough to stick around. A lot of it really just combines some of the technical vulnerabilities with the human vulnerability. And that's really how a lot of these attacks are happening. It's not this specific 0-day or that specific 0-day, or it wasn't necessarily just a purely technical attack. So I'm gonna try to explain how to blend the human element in with that as well. We blend that with something that's called social engineering. That can mean a lot of different things. For the sake of this presentation, we're just gonna talk about the social engineering that relates to hacking and getting into different organizations. Not that kind of briefing. Okay, so basically all it is, at its most basic sense, is you're trying to get a person to either provide you some information or perform some kind of action to aid the attacker. So I was helping with the scoping document this morning, actually, where one of our clients wants us to do just phone social engineering for them on a recurring basis to kind of keep their employees sharp. And one of the things that they don't want us to do is collect passwords. So, okay, that's fine. There are so many other great things that we can do besides just collect passwords. So we'll probably do some fun things about getting them to invoke PowerShell commands and lots of good stuff like that. So it's not always about just not giving out your password on the phone. Since we're going to talk about information that we're looking at, the sensitive stuff, that stuff's really obvious, right? We don't give out our passwords. We don't give out things that are marked internal use only. We don't give out employee ID numbers, so on and so forth. The stuff that kind of slides through the cracks are little pieces of information that don't seem very important at the time, but when you put them together with some of the other information that you find online, then it becomes very, very important. In the defense industry, we call that aggregation of data. When you have something that's unclassified and you have 6 unclassified pieces, but when you put them together, all of a sudden the combination of all that data makes it classified. So the same thing works with social engineering. What may seem like a very unimportant piece of information may turn out to be the key to the kingdom later on. Why it works? It works because it uses people, and people want to be helpful. We're taught from a very young age that we should treat each other well, and the golden rule, and all that good stuff. They want to be helpful, and most of all, they're impatient. So if I want somebody to help me, it may not be the best approach to use the whole female in distress thing. It may be more of just holding up a line somewhere or holding up something in the call queue. Impatience will get you a whole lot further than kindness. Yeah, that's quotable, by the way, if you want to quote me. So the key to success with social engineering, and this is really all it boils down to, is being able to get the information or to get that person to do the action that you want without triggering that little fight or flight warning. That's really hard to say, especially without happy hour. But what that means is it basically triggers a chemical reaction in the brain, the hypothalamus, to be specific. And it's hard to pinpoint at first, except for maybe when you've been out visiting some of the lovely folks out here in the sponsor area. And somebody comes up to you and they're in your face and they're in your personal space and they say, man, I've got the best product in the world. I want to tell you all about it. That little pitch that you just felt in your stomach, that's fight or flight. It's kind of where you kind of clinch up just for a quick second to decide what you're going to do, if you're going to stay and you're going to face that or if you're going to run away. I usually have some kind of phone call or meeting or something when that happens to me. But the same thing works with social engineering. You want to be able to not trigger their spidey sense of, hey, something's not right here. You want to get the information, perform the command, and have them hang up the phone and move on and forget about it, just like it was part of their regular day. So let's talk about targeting. And this is interesting on a couple of levels. And a lot of this will be driven by the kind of organization that we're targeting. So targeting a federal agency for an approved exercise is not the same as targeting a mid-size insurance company. You know, there are different blends of folks in there, sure, but you also need to pay attention to the dynamic and the culture of the target that you are looking at. So one of the reasons the developers are very high on that list is more of the culture and the pace that you've been brought into in the development cycle, right? Everything is now. Everything is, oh, we have to have this new feature. Our competitor has this feature. We have to implement it now. And what happens with that now is that nobody really has time to sit down and think about maybe these are problems for security, or maybe this isn't such a good idea. And because you're always in that now kind of time frame, it really works against you in the eyes of the social engineer. The other thing about it is because you're developers and you're doing all kinds of cool things, you're going to have some kind of elevated privilege. Now, that may not be local admin, it may not be domain admin, but you're probably going to have at least a power user so that you can compile your code and do your testing and open the sockets and all that good stuff. That saves me a step as an attacker. So if I get somebody to run my exploit that's a developer and they have at least elevated privileges on that host, that's cool because that's one less step that I have to take once I'm on the inside. And that's really the trick to it, is finding the right target with the right kinds of credentials in the environment. And while developers are really high, network folks are next. They're right there beside you, right? Because they're all about uptime. So as long as it's impacting uptime, that's all that they're going to focus on. And really, once you're inside, then we can pivot from there. But we're not going to talk too much about that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how this process works and some of the pieces that we look at. And it sounds really lame, and my junior testers get really bummed out when I tell them, all right, this is our target. This is what we're going to do. We're going to start a reconnaissance phase. Go to their website. They're like, well, aren't we going to go to the dark web? Are we going to go to WikiLeaks? Aren't we going to go here? We're going to start with a website. Because the website really tells us a whole lot of information that will be useful to us later on during our attack. Stuff that doesn't seem very important, like locations and services and things that they provide. Usually there are some contact people that you can reach out to and ask questions with. Now, I did not hack EY.com. So much that it scared that monitor. I did not hack EY.com. So what I did was I basically pulled some pieces of examples from different engagements that we've done to kind of sanitize all the data. So even if you do sit down and piece it all back together, it's not going to lead you anywhere. So I'll save you the time. So when you see a large organization, these are so much easier than your medium and small businesses for a lot of reasons. But when I see this, all these different locations, that's fantastic. Because that means that person A in accounting probably doesn't know person B in engineering. And that's going to come in useful to me later on when I decide exactly how I'm going to scope the attack. I don't want so-and-so to sit close to the other person that I'm targeting because they'll just turn around and say, hey, Bill, is that email you sent? I don't understand what you mean. You know, I don't want that to happen because then all of my stuff comes tumbling down at that point. So the bigger, the better. The hiring page, job descriptions are really tough to write now because you have to put out just enough information to get the qualified folks that you need, but not so much that you give away all of the keys to the environment that you're using. Locations are important too, and this one is an EY one, by the way. If you really want to find where the data centers are, you just look for a few keywords like infrastructure, and that usually gives you a pretty good idea. Wherever the network people need to be is usually where one of the major data centers is going to be. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is probably going to be, I don't know, somewhere outside of Atlanta is probably where one of the data centers is. And sometimes they just tell you. I don't know what happened to that slide, but one after it is a news article saying that EY is going to open a brand new data center outside of Atlanta. So again, pieces of public information that don't seem very important can really start to get important when you put them together. So let's go back to job descriptions. This one is fairly sanitized, right? We have pretty generic stuff in here. IDS, IPS, proxies, like normal network and operating system stuff. Oh, that's why. Okay, we'll just blame PowerPoint for that technical error. Anyway, so if I want to find out what antivirus a company is running, because it doesn't matter if my exploit codes and the payloads work against 400 different antivirus vendors, it only needs to work against the one that my target's using. So that's really all that I care about. So it's really kind of step zero before we start looking into how we're going to exploit and how we're going to shovel that payload back to wherever it's going to go. Really need to find the endpoint protection to the antivirus name and really see what else they have in place on the protection side. So while their website may not tell us that, LinkedIn probably will. I love LinkedIn. If you look around, I've got some articles out there about how LinkedIn is the phone book for social engineers, because it literally is the phone book for social engineers. If I want to know who's a developer at this company, I go look on LinkedIn. And there's lots of great stuff. So I don't know this guy, but I'm pretty sure that he would not be happy with me if he found out that I was using him for my example. But it's a great example. So we're going to use him for our example anyway. And if I don't come back later, you'll know why. So this guy worked at our target here. And if we kind of pick through this, I should have highlighted it so it's a little bit easier for you to see. He's really happy about all the stuff that he did there. That was a past job of his, not a current. Past within the past 8 months. So it's highly unlikely that they've changed a whole lot in 8 months. Any of you that work in a large environment know that that's just not happening. So in the middle there, we've got Symantec antivirus. Awesome. That's all I need to really start my testing. But he's also got some other cool stuff in there. He talks about HP and SiteScope and some of the other network technologies that they use. So that's fantastic. I didn't need to make any phone calls. I didn't need to take any risk. All I needed to do was some Google and some LinkedIn searching, and now I know not only a list of types of employees that I might target, but now I also know how I need to start coding on the payload side. And this is all passive, right? I haven't scanned anybody yet. I haven't tried to attack anybody. We're just searching the internet at this point. Company website, they usually give you somebody to talk to. These are the high-profile people. And when we come into organizations and help them plan their training, we make a separate training that's a little bit more tailored for folks that have very public presence for that company, because they're going to be targeted more than anybody. But opening correspondence and dealing with the public is their job. So they need a little bit more on the training side to kind of help them take extra steps to isolate any incidents that might happen. So we've got some employees, we've got a bunch of data in the background. It'd be really cool if I could figure out how their email addresses are put together. There are some tools that go out and do this for you, but it's pretty easy. I mean, you can just Google. And once we find out that their email structure, then we can just pull names from anywhere we want. So if I look at ey.com and I find some email, all I need to do is take my list from LinkedIn, and where else do we go to find people on the internet, right? So there are plenty of Facebook folks that are ey.com folks as well. That's easy to script. All I need to do is, first name dot last name, since we figured that out already, and just add them in there each category. Because we don't want a mass mail, we want a target mail. Is anybody here from Bing? Okay. It's okay, you don't have to tell us, but if you are, the Twitter geotagging map is awesome. Please bring the API back and stop hiding it. So this will go out and actually map all of the tweets where people don't turn off their geolocation and their mobile client. It's cool if you want to check that now. It's definitely something you should keep turned off. But what's great is if I'm going to impersonate somebody on a specific day to send a phishing email, or I'm going to do a phone call to impersonate them, it'd be really awesome if I knew where they were. It'd be really awesome if I knew exactly where they were, as in not at work. So the Twitter mapping is really handy for that. And this API is up and it's down, and they hide it sometimes, but when it's up, it's really useful. But I thought I'd leave it in just because it's cool. It also gives you the history, right? So you can also kind of follow where they've been and where they go and when. So I'm local to the area here in Alexandria. This doesn't look very exciting if you kind of look at the Crystal City area on it. But if you start to look around, if I was really looking for some interesting targets, that'd be a really great place to start. Now, you're not even supposed to have phones in there, so I don't know about those folks in the middle there, but they may not be there anymore. You may need to find different targets. So anyway, metadata. So metadata used to be just something that we all kind of swept under the rug. Recently, that's been a different thing. So now everybody's kind of interested in how all of that works. And there are lots of aggregation tools to help you with this, so you don't actually have to sit around and Google. MultiGo is one of them. It uses a whole lot of open source intelligence gathering tools at once. Right, so as it's pulling, you can start it based on a domain or based on a person, and then run what they call transforms. It will basically go out and crawl and do some DNS resolution and some enumeration from there. But it'll also pull metadata information as it's doing it. The problem with MultiGo is that it's a little too good at its job. So unless you're really experienced at trimming down how the results are shown, you get a whole bunch of data that may or may not be so useful. But it is free. The community edition is usually pretty sufficient for whatever we need. And if you want something that's more straight up metadata, there's a really cool tool out there called FOCA. I love their little guy there, their little penguin. They'll send you a t-shirt too if you ask them. These guys are based out of Spain. And it's basically a free tool that it's Windows, but sometimes you just gotta bite the bullet. I love that I see all these Macs out there. It makes me so happy. So it's worth firing up the Windows VM for and tolerating it for a little bit of time. And basically, it'll go out, you point it toward the website, it'll do the DNS resolution and crawl, and it'll pull down the documents that you've whitelisted for it. So you can pull down all kinds of great stuff. If you don't want to pull down, JPEGs or whatever, you can tell it not to. If you want to pull down things like AI files for Adobe Illustrator, those are very useful because that's usually what their ID card designs are done in. Yeah, so that gets very useful later on. So it basically pulls down all the documents and extracts the metadata out for you, and then it files them all really nicely. So it'll pull out usernames that it's found, it'll pull out file locations. It doesn't really do very well with passwords. They advertise it, but it's sketchy at best. But it's fantastic for fingerprinting to find out their username basis, right? So is that first name, first initial, last name? And it gives you a little bit of fingerprinting on what their software is once you're on the inside. So my initial exploit may have a very limited time where it's useful, especially if it gets submitted somewhere and then they start talking to the endpoint vendor. So it's really useful for me to know that, hey, they're running a really old version of Adobe, or, oh man, they still all need IE7 for this internal website that does weird stuff. So for me, that helps me pivot within the environment once we're inside. And it really only takes a few minutes. You just point at the domain and click go, and then you come back a couple days later and you've got all this cool data. So we've got a whole bunch of data. And the way I like to describe it to some of our clients is, we've basically taken the big bucket of Legos. I have a thing with blocks. I don't know if you guys noticed. We've taken the bucket of Legos and we've dumped it on the floor. And now we're sorting to figure out which pieces of information are going to be useful, because we may put them together differently. So our 3 types here of social engineering, really when it comes down to it all, they can fit into 3 buckets. We can do phishing, we can do phone, they call it vishing sometimes. It's kind of lame. I think they could have came up with a better name. And we can do the physical stuff. So sometimes clients will allow us to do what's called a full red team, where you get to actually physically break in and steal stuff, which is fantastic. Because once you have physical access to most of the machines, you're pretty much in at that point. Not very many folks are running full disk encryption on their desktop towers. Just saying. And if they are, that's cool. I mean, there are other ways around that, but that's usually the easiest way. So our evil VPN client, I love this one. So basically, when we were poking through the company website, something that was really boring and not really worth our time, we found that our target had posted their VPN profile online, but I think they were supposed to make it internal, but they accidentally pushed it externally. And they took it down, but that's okay, because archive.org grabbed it before they took it down. So we just kind of went and grabbed our own local copy at that point. They even included a download link for the installer. So I didn't even have to configure the installer myself. It was all just there for the download. All you needed were credentials to make it work. So what we decided to do was we took all the information that we had gathered before, and we put it into an email, because we're going to do some phishing, and phishing is usually very effective for several reasons, all of which I've already described. So what we did was we waited until the IT guy, and IT guy is accurate. This division only had one IT person for what they were doing in that entire region. So an East Coast IT guy and a West Coast IT guy. So we basically waited until the IT guy for that region was going to be out of the office, which we knew because it was on Facebook, and he was bragging about his vacation. And we crafted up our email about an hour and a half before they usually cut out for the day. And it wasn't oh, please upgrade this when you get a chance. And we basically told them, we've upgraded the concentrator, it's gonna be faster, it's gonna perform better, and you gotta put some incentive in there, otherwise they're not gonna do it. Oh, but by the way, since we're nice folks, we'll give you until the end of the day to install the new client, otherwise your VPN's not gonna work anymore. So that seemed to really get their attention. So at this point, we've done research for, we had a good probably 200 hours of reconnaissance in before this point. And we crafted the email, we got our site ready, and how many emails did we send? Not 500, not 5,000, 5, right? Because when we want to do this, we want to do it right. We don't want to send out 500 emails and get the attention of the one security guy that they have, and get them looking into seeing what's going on. Plus, if you send too many, then everybody starts talking about it. Well, I didn't get that. Did you get that? And then you don't want people to talk about it. So basically, oh, I love that I don't have to explain what this box is to you guys. That's so awesome. Usually I have to go, nah, this is a Java applet, but I don't have to do that today. So what we did was, in our phishing email here, you'll see that we have a link in there to go download your new client. And you'll also see that it's HTTPS, right? We went all out, right? So we bought the certificate, configured it properly, which is, kind of rare these days. And also went out and bought a code signing certificate. Talk to me about that later. And signed our applet. So because these guys needed a legacy browser for most of their applications, we knew that it wasn't one of the new fancier ones in the later editions that block all that by default. They have to have the legacy one. So it'll just let the user run that all day. So they run it, and it goes to grab their new configuration. Now, this part is my favorite because that's not even like a real status bar. That's just like an animated JPEG. We literally just put it in to just wait for about 5 seconds and then just forward on to the next page. And the next page is, oh, you know what, you're good. You're good. Go back to what you were doing. And nothing got installed other than the payload, right? Nothing got tampered with on the VPN side, but we didn't need that because we had a keylogger inside of the payload. So not only did we get our reverse shell, we also got all the keystrokes for whoever that was. So you just waited for them to lock their screen or walk away or come back the next morning, and then you pull their keystrokes, and now you've got credentials. Well, we have the VPN client and the VPN profile because they gave it to us. And now we have a whole bunch of credentials that we can start to use to traverse inside the network. So that's one of the ways that a bunch of little pieces that don't seem very important at first can add up to like really bad. I don't have any slides for this, but I'm doing pretty good on time, so I want to touch on it really lightly. Not all phishing happens with email. Back to LinkedIn. We're doing an engagement right now, and I can't show you the picture, and it's really sad because it's a great one. So stay tuned to my Twitter for a couple of months, and then I'll put it out there. We basically made up a couple employees for our target organization and put them on LinkedIn. But not just any employees, right? There has to be it has to be done exactly right. So you've either got to go big with like an executive or somebody in senior management who doesn't have a profile, or you have to start small with a newer person who's younger and probably just out of college and has a really cute, maybe stock-like photo. It's all about the photo. So if the photo is stock-ish like, but just real enough to look like it's a really nice girl, really nice girls get a lot of LinkedIn invites. So what we've done is we've made our person for LinkedIn, and she has a decent amount of education and just basic experience. She's only been at that company for 8 months, but she's really, really social. So she's, trying to talk to people and get more links and get linked in with everybody. So our girl, our fake girl, now has more connections on LinkedIn than like everybody on my team together. So, right? So we're being outdone by our own engineer. We did find 2 weeks ago that if you're a little too aggressive or a little too social on LinkedIn, they will disable your account for suspicious activity for violating their terms of service. And they'll give you a copy of the terms of service, and okay. And if you want to appeal it, you can. So didn't have anything to lose, so we appealed it, and our intern girl was very sorry, and she just wanted to know what she needed to do to get her account re-enabled. So LinkedIn folks are really good at customer service. Is there anybody from LinkedIn here? Probably too late. Anyway, so they were back to us within 48 hours of, oh, you know what? We are so sorry. That got disabled by accident. That's our bad. Here, we re-enabled it for you. So now we don't have to start over again. So our girl is back in action. And what's bad is that people on the security team at that target organization are starting to link in with her. So it's going to be a really awkward outbrief when we're done because everybody on the team that hired us is actively linking in with her. We didn't go after them, that whole biting the hand that feeds you thing. So I'm not sure how we're going to handle that. I've got a couple of months before I have to worry about it. But anyway, moral of the story is, phishing is not just email. So when it comes time, and I'm not sure exactly what the payload or the attack is going to look like at this point, we're still fingerprinting the rest of the environment. So when it comes time, they have really great email, you know, all those great anti-spam things, they have different names. I'm not going to drop any vendor names. They have a lot of money invested in email security, and they spend a lot of time screening out things that look remotely suspicious. So as a hacker, you know, it's just like the kid's book, right? If you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you go through it. So we just won't use email. We won't email our phishing link. We'll use something else like LinkedIn. Because why worry about the controls on email when you can just go around? So not all phishing is done with email. Let's talk about physical attacks. These are my favorite. And we get to do these about, I'd say 30% of our engagements. The clients will come to us and ask us if they can include a physical attack with all of the cyber stuff. And that's great. That's the best thing to do. Because again, physical access to the host is king. Once you have physical access, we're done. So how does this work? How do we really case buildings and walk into places that we don't belong? So there is a little bit of method to the madness here. And it starts on the company website, but we're not gonna go back to the company website. We're gonna look around for some other stuff. Most of our clients are not local, and they're not going to pay for me to go hang out in Chicago for 3 weeks to case our target area. So we've gotten pretty good at figuring out what we can do remotely and what we need to do on site. And reconnaissance from afar is getting easier and easier every day. Pokemon Go has been, wow, that's been a game changer. Because what do you do when you can't get somewhere close enough to get pictures? You send a bunch of Pokemon over to, anyway. See me later. So what we do for that is we start off with really basic stuff, just Google and Bing Maps. And you know, for Bing, I wasn't really sold on their stuff because it's Bing. But they have this 3D rotation kind of feature that makes it really cool. So you can actually look around the side of your target building and rotate and look at the different view. And what I'm looking for is not necessarily just ways in and out of the building, but I want to see what's around it. I want to try to figure out where the employees park. Is the parking lot open? Do they have to use a garage? Do they have to park and walk? Do they have parking at all? Parking is important because I'm looking for places where I'm going to be able to do on-site reconnaissance once I get there. And I'm also looking for where the smokers might hang out, because there's always a spot where the smokers hang out. That's usually the easiest door to get back into the building in. A while back, Google started putting a whole bunch of traffic cameras into maps, and that's really useful for me because if I'm doing a target location in a heavily populated area like here, I can sit and watch the flow of traffic in and out of the building whenever I want at home, you know, without pants. So it's great. What we're looking for when we're watching these is not really just when the people come and go. That's important. You kind of want a feel for when the peak times are for when the employees enter and exit the building. Some places that's 8, some places that's 7, some places that's 9, so on and so forth. Also, what we're looking for after hours is we're looking for when all the lights are off, when everybody leaves, when the lights come on each floor, because that means that's when the cleaning crew is hitting that floor. We'll talk about the cleaning crew later, but there's a reason that we're watching it at night to see when the lights turn on. So let's go to Chicago for a little bit. So our target here was in a multi-tenant building. Pretty large building, so I think that their office space was on the 15th floor, no, it's 12th floor. 12th floor of this building. So we were supposed to gain physical entry to that area of that building. Okay, cool. So what we did was started digging around in the background of the building itself. So it's a very different game when your target organization doesn't own the building that you're testing. And in this case, usually organizations who own their buildings are very quiet about what's there and what's not. But if it's a multi-tenant building, that building management company wants to show you everything. And they will. They're really nice folks, by the way. They'll tell you all kinds of great stuff. So it just so happened that the owners of this building had vacancies that you could call and talk to them about. So we made up a fake company and made up some fake business cards and bought some burners and called and talked to the nice lady here and scheduled an appointment to go see an open office suite on the 12th floor. So we scheduled all that before we got to Chicago. Back to, they brag a lot about their building. So this building had a lot of cool features. They had underground parking in a garage that was reserved only for that building, so there was no visitor parking there. But they did have a zip car service there. Really like the zip car service, by the way, for several reasons. But they also give you some pictures, and on the website it gives you instructions on, how to get to the zip car if you're just a zip car renter. So you can just, roll on into that building and go down to the garage and pick up the zip car and go on about your business. This building also had really great security. And with that really great security came these scary looking guys that stood behind consoles that checked in visitors and things. There are turnstiles that you can't really see in this photo. And there are also badge readers there. Badge readers are really important. So just by looking at that badge reader there and seeing what brand it was, that was the beginning of the end for these guys. They just didn't know it. So this organization, they were serious about their security. So everybody in the building had one card to get through the turnstiles in the lobby. And then our target organization had another card to get into their office suite. So we do a lot of badge RFID cloning. I didn't bring any of that with me today. You can check my bag. It's just, full of laptop junk. But we have a lot of mobile equipment to do that. So when you look at these kinds of buildings, you also want to ask questions like, who cleans the place? Do you include that in the price? That's important because that may need to be a cover that we use to get in if there's no really good way to get into the building once we're in Chicago. So they did tell us that, ABM does that. Okay. So we had some buddies in Chicago that grabbed us some photos of the cleaning guy taking a smoke about 11:30 at night. He was kind of pissed, too. But anyway, ABM gets their uniforms from Cintas. So you can actually order direct off their website, but they only will send them to you if you pay via payroll deduction from ABM. Okay, fine. That's probably for people like me, so that I can't just buy that kind of stuff. But because it's from Cintas, you can buy the jacket without the ABM patch. And on Amazon, you can buy a big stack of those blank patches for like $1. So what we did was we bought the big stack of blank patches for like $1, some printable iron-on templates, and then ordered the actual Cintas jackets online. All right, so I had to figure out how to use the iron because that was whoa, that was way out of my league. So it took several of that big stack of patches to really get to some good ones. And then took it to the cleaners, paid them $5 to sew on all the patches, and we have really, really, really close jackets that look just like the cleaning crew. So if we needed to kind of toss that on to get in through the door and through the lobby without raising any eyebrows, we could. So backup plans. Anybody heard of the proxmark 3 here? That's okay. It's kind of phasing out a little bit. So the proxmark 3 is basically an RFID research tool. We'll call it a research tool. It's not really used that way. But you could, if you really wanted to just research with it, that would be fine. And it's really cool. It reads a lot of the tag information, gives you a lot of good stuff. It can read and write most tags, so that's very useful. Even if you want to use it for like non-nefarious purposes, like making another copy of your parking garage card in case you lose yours. Because what those companies charge to replace that is ridiculous. It's about the size of a solid-state drive, so it'll fit in the palm of my hand, but it still needs external power and it still needs an antenna. So for people with small hands and short arms like me, I can't really tuck it in my inside pocket and run that cable down my arm and palm the antenna because the antenna's, the low frequency one is about the size of a CD. I can't really be very discreet with that because it's just, my hand's just too small. So I had to come up with a couple of different ways to try to disguise this thing because once we were in Chicago, we needed to get close enough to the employees to be able to read their ID cards, so that we could rewrite our own on top of the ones that we brought with us. So I started with the RFID binder of doom here, and it's just Velcro on the back of that. That's a battery pack from Best Buy or whatever. The proxmark 3 doesn't take a lot of power. I mean, that little battery pack will power it all day. On the other side, you put the antenna in a CD case. It does give you an idea of, it really is the size of a CD. But the problem with it was that the leather on the binder was preventing the card from getting power, and that's how those cards are read. So basically, when you hold the card up to the card reader is actually powering that card on to send the information that's on the little chip inside. So if you can't power the card, you can't read the card. That's a problem. So Plan 2 moved on to the Grid-It, and there are lots of Macs out there, so I'm sure somebody out there has a Grid-It. So the Grid-It is designed for people that need to keep all their stuff in place, like those 50,000 adapters that us Mac people need all the time. But it also holds all of the proxmark pieces very still and without putting any wear on them. So basically, you take it like this, you drop it in a laptop case that you can just kind of swing as you're walking on the street. Just kind of swing it around, and then if you need to bump into somebody, you can. But it's very delicate technology. So it's, even if one of the wires just comes just a little bit loose, like you lose all of the stuff that you had gathered. I'd recommend investing in some of these, by the way, RFID blocking card holders. That green one is about the best that I've seen so far, and I've tested a lot of them. I think it's called ID Stronghold. Anyway, not a perfect solution, but that's how you protect against that. A couple of years ago, some folks at Bishop Fox decided that they were tired of trying to grab people's butts on the train and trying to get close to them with that antenna to get their card read. So they basically took one of these long-range readers for a parking garage and modified the inside to be able to not only read the card, but it's also going to save it to a micro SD on the board there and then display the contents as well. So that's a lot of batteries, and those batteries don't last very long. But it lasts long enough to get about 200 card reads. So what we did with this in Chicago was we were close to the Target building, and we knew what the employees' badges sort of looked like. They didn't put their company logo on them because they didn't want people like us trying to steal their badge content. And that was fine, except for they gave their employees these neon purple tote bags with their company logo on the side. So it didn't really matter what their badges looked like. All we had to do was just look for the tote bags. And a really cool feature of this board, it's not in this photo here, but you can also add on the Bluetooth piece and sync it with your phone. So you can actually, your phone will buzz every time you get a good read, and then you can see the output on your screen, and it timestamps it. And the timestamp is really important because if I walk by a security guard at 1:30, like that's the badge that I want to try first because it's probably going to work everywhere. So with these guys, they thought that they were safe because we needed 2 different kinds of cards, and we needed to figure out how to get into their office suite. So when we did our meeting with the real estate person, she showed us her card because that's how she had to get through. So she was showing us how the card, what it looked like and how safe it was because they had to use those in the lobby. And then we used the reader again on the street with all the tote bags, but I mean, all the tote bags went to Starbucks anyway. So careful in Starbucks with people with bags that look a little shady. So, got the badge information. We used some different tools other than the proxmark to make our own copies of those. You can also buy a badge printer to do all the printing on top of it. Fairly cheap on eBay. It does a decent job too. Laminated and everything. So sometimes at the end of the engagement, we'll give the fake cards to the client, and they can't tell that it's not one of their legitimate ID cards, usually because our printer is better than theirs. eBay. You can get anything off eBay. So one of these other pictures that we saw when we were browsing through the website was the service elevator in the basement. Everybody kind of forgets about the service elevator because it's big and it's usually hidden and it smells funny because they use it for trash. But the service elevator is really like the key to the kingdom in most parts of these assessments. So what we did, so we took all of our stuff that I just talked you through. We did our cover story, we had our meeting, we gathered our badges, we made our badges, watched the cleaning crew, made sure that that was all good. The reason that we needed to watch the cleaning crew was because we didn't have the code for the alarm system. So we needed to wait until the cleaning crew went in at night and disarmed it before we could go in after them and do all of our stuff. So what we did was that evening, we reserved the zip car. We took it in and out a couple of times just to be sure that it would work. because I didn't want to rely on just the zip car and then it fall through at the end. So reserved the zip car. We didn't do our uniforms because I didn't think we needed them at that point. Reserved the zip car, rolled back into the garage because it can open the garage. Parked the car, strolled right up to that service elevator, took the service elevator up to the 12th floor, used the clone card to get in after the cleaning crew, and then just went around and logged into a bunch of machines and put some evil USBs in them and some keyloggers and all kinds of great stuff. But at that point, the cleaning crew, because you're wearing a fake badge, they don't know that you don't belong there. So they'll unlock doors for you and help you with this and help you carry things, and they're very helpful folks. Very, very helpful along the way for us there. And basically, the way that we reported it to them was we called them on the phone inside of their server room. It was kind of a jerk move, I know, but sometimes you can't help it. And then we had to take some selfies, because caller ID can be spoofed really easy, and they didn't necessarily believe us. So we had to take some selfies with some of their servers while we were on the phone with them. So that's kind of a high level of what I put together for today. We do have some time if you have questions. If you don't want to ask your questions in front of everybody, that's fine. I'm probably going to wander around out here and try to find the bar like everybody else. So if we have formal questions, we can do those now. Oh yeah, I can't see you guys because of that light.
Selfies in the data center.
That's awesome, between recon and the selfies. With these guys, how long did it take from recon to selfies? 4.5 months. Yeah, it seems like it goes fast when you boil it all down to some slides, but sometimes it's a slow process. Yeah, in the back.
The actual reading of the employee cards, was that just done by bumping with the proxmark or whatever?
So the actual reading of the employee card, so we have a couple of options with that, and you can do it with the bumping, but this tool is a better bet. So this tool has about a 2 to 3 foot read range. So I don't even have to be creepy, right? I can just toss it in a bag. It's not in my bag. I can just toss it in a bag and literally just walk through a crowded area. And especially in places like here and Atlanta and places with a large transit system, if your target is close to a transit station, then you just take the train in the morning and just kind of walk with the employees, and you pick up their information on the way there. There are a couple of different kinds and a couple of different ways to do this. Not all the readers work on all the badges. That's a whole nother presentation. But if you tag me, I can get you some information on it. Yeah? We do have a get out of jail free card. We call that our authorization letter. And I've only had to show the authorization letter once, and that was to a cop. We've got time. I've got slides to go with that. We've got time. You need to see the slides. There's a story there that just can't be done any other way. Just gotta find it. Oh, so my boss and I do a lot of this kind of testing together, and my boss is 67, so we don't really look like creepy people that break into buildings. We kind of look like, I'm taking my dad out, from the home for a day. So that's really worked to our advantage quite a few times. So we did this presentation at Hacker Halted in Atlanta last week. But I just want to get to, and it uses some of the same slides, walks you through some of the recon like we did, but, oh yeah, so theatrical makeup is very powerful, right? So Sean wanted to be our homeless guy for reconnaissance, because in a big city like Chicago, they have a big homeless problem there, so that's a great way to do recon. So we roughed him up a little bit with some theater makeup. So that's 10 minutes with some theater makeup and a dental appliance, right? So we just stock up on that stuff when it's clearance from Halloween and then just hang on to it. So 10 minutes, some makeup and some bad fake teeth, and now we have homeless Sean. Let's see here. That's how cards work. We're not going to get into that. think it's at the end. We may go back to that later. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we have a client. I'm not sure if I mentioned or not that SecureCon does a lot of work in the smart grid and critical infrastructure. So while I'm in and out of businesses a lot, I'm also in and out of substations and chemical plants and like weird places a lot. So I have a really varied work wardrobe, right? Because I have to have all my OSHA compliant things and then like people clothes and so on and so forth. So anyway, this client was one of the larger smart grid-like controllers. I have to be careful with my words. We're not going to talk about where they are. But anyway, in the States, in the States. And they had this backup control center, and it was a really big hush-hush secret, and no, you're not going to be able to find it. We're not going to tell you where it is. We want you to break into it, but we're not going to tell you how or where it's going to be. You're going to have to figure it all out on your own. Okay, that's fair. I thought that was a fair challenge. So I spent a lot of time digging for this place. Like, I was down into like real estate records from like surrounding counties. You know, if they're following industry standards for disaster recovery, you know, they can't be more or less than 70 miles from their primary site. So then I'm drawing circles on the map. Like, it's getting like really serious. And then I finally went back to my social media stuff and was parsing through it, and somebody actually checked in on Foursquare. Foursquare, right? And I'm doing training at the super secret site today. Okay, thanks, man. He doesn't work there anymore. I'm not really sure what happened there, but not because of me. So anyway, we found this place. We looked it up on the map and did all that great stuff that I've already talked about. But when it came to do on-site reconnaissance, it's a backup center, but it's like hidden in the hills. So basically, I've got 8 minutes. Anybody who's familiar with like the Cold War AT&T long lines project offices that were built basically to keep communications going in case there was a nuclear bombing, this is one of those old sites that AT&T auctioned off, right? Like, I so want this place. So it's literally in the middle of nowhere. So when we go to do the on-site reconnaissance and we do our drive-by, this is the road to get to this place. And that's like a 1.5 lane road. You can't even put 2 cars on that thing at once. I think the beginning of Blair Witch Project kind of looked the same. Like the original. I know they're doing a new one, but the new one will probably start out the same way. So anyway, and all that great stuff about looking for smokers and watching from Starbucks and all of that, like, all that's out the window, right? There's none of that here. So you do what we call the drive-by, and that's where you just take a whole bunch of pictures as you drive by with your phone and hope something turns out, because it's not like you can hang out and just watch. You have to keep going, because if you stop, then it blocks traffic for both ways on the road. So that gets a little bit weird. So it's a whole bunch of nothing. This big fortress pops up. Big cool-looking tower, right? Big fence, and then it disappears again as quickly as you see it. And that's it. There's some houses around there and nothing else. So we thought, wow, okay, well, this is going to be a little bit different. So that fence, I didn't talk about how we deal with fences. There are a couple of different ways. Back to the children's book, over, under, through. This one, because it's curved and pointed at the top, it's really hard to go over it. I'm too short, and even if I had some kind of boost, it probably wouldn't work very well. Those little giant ladders work pretty well, but this place is in the middle of nowhere, right? So there's no way that I'm going to be able to get this ladder and all of its pieces out in the middle of the woods without waking up the neighbors or something, because it's silent out there. It's so quiet. So what we did was we decided, well, you know, if you can't go over, if you can't go through it, we're probably going to go under it along the fence line here. So we used a really sophisticated tool, very complicated, you know. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it or not, but maybe one day you will. And we literally went out, it's November, it's, I don't know, like 11 o'clock at night, and I forgot to check the weather before we went. So like we're in like our black, we're badass ninja suits, and it snowed. So checking the weather and checking wardrobe before you go on these things is really important. And you know, I've never made that mistake since, but it also hasn't snowed since either. So I guess that's just part of it. So anyway, we go out, it's about 11 o'clock at night, and there are 2 of us that go into the woods with shovels. And we start digging under this fence. Now they're supposed to be doing walkthroughs once an hour. They're supposed to be walking the perimeter of the entire facility. But it's snowing, and they didn't want to, so nobody came out to see anybody that may or may not have been digging under the fence. And the problem with all of their fancy cameras were that they were night blind. So once it got dark, none of their cameras were useful. They just looked like a black screen. So we were able to stand out there and dig under this fence in a couple of different spots because the soil was really rocky. So we're computer people, man. We don't dig things very well. So because of the rocks, then it's even louder, right? So the shovels are hitting the rocks and hitting the fence. And so we moved around a couple of times, but we finally got to a point where we were good. I slide under the fence. This is me on the right side of the fence. You can't see the no trespassing sign there on the fence, but we thought that was great. It's been 2 hours at this point. We're getting pretty cocky. And just about ready to get my boss underneath at the fence, and then we start to see these lights. I'm like, oh, all right. So Rent-A-Cop couldn't even come out here and talk to us. They just had to call the cops. Like, that's pretty lame. Like, they should at least come out and see what's going on. So we go over to the cruiser, and it's a good 50 yards from where we were, hands and all that. And deputy pops out, and she looks at us, and she goes, "Is that your rental car about a mile up the road?" Yeah. She's like, "Oh, well, the neighbor reported it as suspicious because it had out-of-state plates, and it was abandoned along the road. And then he saw you guys walking around." I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, this is our authorization letter, this is what we're doing. We're authorized by this company to do this test." And she's like, yeah, whatever. Can you sign here?" Okay. So we sign the paperwork, and she bids us a good evening, and we go back under the fence. But the lights from the cruiser caused the cameras to have a bit of a seizure, so I think it must have woke up Rent-A-Cop. So he comes out, and they're armed, but they're not going to use their firearm. So he's all but shaking with his flashlight, wanting to know what we're doing. I mean, really, it's like me and an old guy. Does this look scary to you? So we explained to him, what's happening and what we were doing, and, we showed him the letter. And in the letter, there's a procedure. If you're presented with this letter, you are supposed to contact the following people, and their boss and their boss's boss is on there. Now, some people will make a fake letter that says silly things like, if you catch these guys, you have to help them no matter what. I don't like to do that because usually that gets them fired. And like, all right, I have a little bit of morals left, but not very much. So, as the guy's looking at it, I'm like, you really need to call that number. He's like, that's my boss's boss. I'm like, yeah, you really need to call him because he's going to want to know why I didn't get inside. So he calls, and he's like, all right, well, I guess you guys can go now. I said, do you want us to fill in the holes that we dug under the fence first? He's like, what holes? So we'll take care of it. It'd be nice if you could hold the light for us. That'd be very helpful. So at this point, we're dripping wet, we're frozen, and we're walking back to the car. I'm dragging the shovel at this point because I don't care. And neighbor guy is waiting for us. I'm not feeling very social at this point. I don't care what neighbor guy has to say, but my boss is a really nice guy. So he's humoring neighbor guy, and neighbor guy is kind of shifting from foot to foot. And he's like, I saw your car, and I was worried. And he's like, as I'm throwing the shovels into the trunk, he's like, I saw you guys go into the woods, and I saw that you had shovels. You can't make this up. He looked at me and he said, and I watched The Sopranos. I know what happens. Okay. So as we get in the car to leave, my boss looks at him and he said, well, 3 of us went in, but only 2 of us came out. So that's how that one ends. I got 25 seconds until they pull me off of the stage here. Oh, wait, don't go away, man. You stood that whole time. I want to hear your question.
All right, so just real quick, you're clearly very sophisticated.
That's so polite. I've been called so many other things.
You have talents. They're useful talents. Is there anything an organization can really do to stop somebody who's sophisticated and dedicated to get in?
It's a process. So I have a white paper that's all about detecting and preventing social engineering attacks in the enterprise. Find me, and I will email it to you. It's not easy, right? It's not like patching vulnerabilities. You don't just apply that patch. Oh, we did training, we're done. Oh, that's good. We'll worry about that next year, because that's what happens. So it's kind of a combination of training and, God, policy and procedure, right? Because if somebody calls and reports a suspicious person or some kind of suspicious email, that only works if there's a process to handle it on the backside. And that's usually the biggest part where organizations will fall apart. Like they'll have all the training, they'll have all the procedures and processes, and then when it comes to actually doing something, they don't know what to do. So that's the short answer. I will get you a business card and I will send you a white paper later.
Cool, thanks.
And I am so out of time. So thanks so much, guys. I'll be out front.